Alrighty, sorry about the delay and our extremely late start this week. My apologies. I got wrapped up in some other stuff. So yeah, welcome back to Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid pilot narrator Fragath, and today we're going to read more of Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. This last week, we got the thrilling opening action sequence, which to date is still probably one of the most thrilling and well done military sci fi action sequences ever committed to pen and paper. Um, many, there are many imitators, but no duplicators. Um, I like to hold it over John Ringo in that regard. Actually, David Drake does pretty well. I'd kind of like to get around to some of the Hammers Slammers stuff that he's done over the years, among others. Those are if you like military sci-fi, he's a good choice, I would say. Some stuff that's very close to things like the things they carried. If anybody's ever read that, um, some pretty good work in there. So anyway, then we got some backstory on our protagonist. And so our protagonist is young. He's from a wealthy family, um, and he's got a less wealthy friend named Carl, who is like, "Hey, I'm going to join the Force," and he's like, "Well, I'll totally go with you," not really knowing whether or not he will. And then of course they go to sign up, even though our protagonist, who should still be Johnny Rico, right? It is still Johnny Rico. It's definitely Johnny. Pretty sure it's still Johnny Rico. Um, Goes ahead and well, they go to sign up, and Carmen Ibanez is there, who Johnny is totally into, and she's like, "I want to be a pilot," and he's like, "I'm totally signing up. I want to be a pilot too." Problem is, he has no aptitudes for anything really. Um, so he's like, well, at the bottom of his list, he has selected the K9 Corps and mobile infantry. And well, the K9 Corps guy is like, "No, sorry, you just you don't love dogs enough, so you can't." Basically. So how about some infantry? And he's like, "Okay, I guess I will." So in this upcoming chapter, we're mostly going to get what training for the infantry is like. We are, I think, going to touch on some of the philosophy that the book has going on, which is where things get a tad divisive. Um, I think anybody listening to this, having never read the book, uh, is probably like, I thought this was supposed to be like fascism 101. It's like it's kind of not. it's it's there's aspects of that in there. We'll get to that. But it's really I think it gets massively overhyped. Um, did I really just lose my page? No, I didn't. Okay, we're good. I think people get upset or excited about it one way or the other a bit more than I think it deserves. I'm not saying it's bad. Starship Troopers is a classic. It just is. It really is. It writes the book on how do you do military sci-fi and how do you integrate power armor into a futuristic military setting. And it just nails that. It nails it so well that basically anybody who's ever done anything worthwhile with the concept has generally aped it in some way. Um, Including Armor by Stakely, including to a lesser extent, All You Need Is Kill by Japanese author's name that I can't remember off the top of my head because I don't have the cover of the book looking at me right now. Sorry. Um, I try to do better, but I forget things. Um, which I'm planning on getting to after we get through this, and then I want to do Full Metal Panic because A, they're all published and translated in English, and B, they're fun. That will probably wrap up our year. Even though I kind of wanted to get to, well, we'll see if I can get to Yukikaze, because Yukikaze is great. Like that's legitimately good sci-fi. It's almost beyond reproach. Although the translation is a tad stiff, though I've gathered that the actual language used is fairly stiff and dry, so it's not that out there, or poorly translated at that. We will never get the third volume translated, nor the fourth, which is now out as of I think last year. We'll never get them. I've given up hope. We got the first two, and they're great, but we're definitely never getting volume 3 and 4. Anyway, so yeah, now we get to see what life is all about as a recruit. All right, give me one sec to get some more fluid in me, and start banging this out. It is going to have to be a short one because I've got things going on, which is part of why I'm late. But we'll try and get a chunk done. We'll be about a third of the way done after this, I'd say. 2/5? Sure, whatever. Chapter 3. He shall rule them with a rod of iron. Revelations 2:25. I did basic at Camp Arthur Curry on the northern prairies, along with a couple of thousand other victims, and I do mean camp, as the only permanent buildings there were to shelter equipment. We slept and ate in tents. We lived outdoors, if you call that living, which I didn't at the time. I was used to a warm climate. It seemed to me that the North Pole was just 5 miles north of camp and getting closer. Ice Age returning, no doubt. But exercise will keep you warm, and they saw to it that we got plenty of that. The first morning we were The first morning we were there, they woke us up before daybreak. I had had trouble adjusting to the change in time zones, and it seemed to me that I had just got to sleep. I couldn't believe that anyone seriously intended that I should get up in the middle of the night. But they did mean it. A speaker somewhere was blaring out a military march fit to wake the dead, and a hairy nuisance who had come charging down to the excuse me. Whoa. My diaphragm did not like that. A speaker somewhere was blaring out a military march fit to wake the dead, and a hairy nuisance who had come charging down the company street yelling, "Everybody out! Show a leg! On the bounce!" came marauding back again just as I had pulled the covers over my head, tipped over my cot, and dumped me onto the cold, hard ground. It was an impersonal attention. He didn't even wait to see if I hit. 10 minutes later, dressed in trousers, undershirt, and shoes, I was lined up with the others in ragged ranks for setting up exercises, just as the sun looked over the eastern horizon. Facing us was a broad-shouldered, mean-looking man, dressed just as we were, except that while I looked and felt like a poor job of embalming, his chin was shaved blue, his trousers were sharply creased, you could have used his shoes for mirrors, and his manner was alert, wide awake, relaxed, and rested. You got the impression that he never needed to sleep, just 10,000-mile checkups and dust him off occasionally. He bellowed, "Company! Attention! I am Career Ship Sergeant Zim, your company commander. When you speak to me, you will salute and say, 'Sir.' You will salute and 'Sir' anyone who carries an instructor's baton." He was carrying a swagger cane, and now made a quick reverse moulinette with it to show moulinet? I don't actually know how that's pronounced. A quick reverse moulinet with it to show that what he meant by an instructor's baton. I had noticed men carrying them when we had arrived the night before, and had intended to get one myself. They looked smart. Now I changed my mind. Because we don't have enough officers around here for you to practice on. You'll practice on us. Who sneezed? No answer. Who sneezed?
I did,
A voice answered. I did what?
I sneezed.
I sneezed, sir.
I sneezed, sir. I'm cold, sir.
Oh ho! Zim strode up to the man who had sneezed, shoved the ferrule of the swagger cane an inch under his nose, and demanded, Name?
Jenkins, sir.
Jenkins. Zim repeated, as if the word were somehow distasteful, even shameful. I suppose some night on patrol you're going to sneeze just because you've got a runny nose, eh?
I hope not, sir.
So do I. But you're cold. We'll fix that. He pointed with his stick. See that armory over there? I looked and could see nothing but prairie except for one building that seemed to be almost on the skyline. Fall out! Run around it! Run, I said! Fast! Bronsky! Pace him! Right, Sarge. One of the 5 or 6 other baton carriers took out after Jenkins, caught up with him easily, cracked him across the tight of his pants with the baton. Zim turned back to the rest of us, still shivering at attention. He walked up and down, looked us over, and seemed awfully unhappy. At last he stepped out in front of us, shook his head, and said, apparently to himself, but he had a voice that carried, To think that this had to happen to me! He looked at us. You apes! No, not apes. You don't rate that much. You pitiful mob of sickly monkeys. You sunken-chested, slack-bellied, drooling refugees from apron strings. In my whole life I never saw such a disgraceful huddle of mamma's spoiled little darlings in. You, there! Suck up the gut! Eyes front! I'm talking to you! I pulled in my belly, even though I was not sure he had addressed me. He went on, and I began to forget my goose-flesh in hearing him storm. He never once repeated himself, and he never used either profanity or obscenity. I learned later that he saved those for very special occasions, which this wasn't. But he described our shortcomings, physical, mental, moral, and genetic, in great and insulting detail. But somehow I was not insulted. I became greatly interested in studying his command of language. I wished that we had had him on our debate team. At last he stopped and seemed about to cry. I can't stand it, he said bitterly. I've just got to work some of it off. I had a better set of wooden soldiers when I was 6. All right! Is there any one of you jungle lice who thinks he can whip me? Is there a man in the crowd? Speak up! There was a short silence to which I contributed. I didn't have any doubt at all that he could whip me. I was convinced. I heard a voice far down the line, the tall end. I reckon I can, sir. Zim looked happy. Good! Step out here where I can see you. The recruit did so, and he was impressive, at least 3 inches taller than Sergeant Zim and broader across the shoulders. What's your name, soldier? Breckenridge, sir, and I weigh 210 pounds, and there ain't any of it slack-bellied. Any particular way you'd like to fight? Sir, you just pick your own method of dying. I'm not fussy. Okay, no rules. Start whenever you like. Zim tossed his baton aside. It started, and it was over. The big recruit was sitting on the ground, holding his left wrist in his right hand. He didn't say anything. Zim bent over him. Broken? Reckon it might be, sir. I'm sorry. You hurried me a little. Do you know where the dispensary is? Never mind. Jones, take Breckenridge over to the dispensary. As they left, Zim slapped him on the right shoulder and said quietly, Let's try it again in a month or so. I'll show you what happened. I think it was meant to be a private remark, but they were standing about 6 feet in front of where I was slowly freezing solid. Zim stepped back and called out,
Okay, we've got one man in this company at least. I feel better. Do we have another one? Do we have two more? Any two of you scrofulous toads think you can stand up to me? He looked back and forth along our ranks. Chicken-livered, spineless. Ho, ho, yes, step out. Two men who had been side by side in ranks stepped out together. I suppose they had arranged it in whispers right there, but they were also far down the tall end, so I didn't hear. Zim smiled at them. Names for your next of kin, please. Heinrich. Heinrich what? Heinrich, sir. Bitte. He spoke rapidly to the other recruit and added politely, He doesn't speak much standard English yet, sir. Meyer, mein Herr, the second man supplied. That's okay. Lots of 'em don't speak much of it when they get here. I didn't myself. Tell Meyer not to worry. He'll pick it up. But he understands what we're going to do. Jawohl, agreed Meyer. Certainly, sir. He understands standard. He just can't speak it fluently. Fluently. All right. Where did you two pick up those face scars? Heidelberg? Nein. No, sir. Königsberg. Same thing. Zim had picked up his baton after fighting Breckenridge. He twirled it and asked, Perhaps you would each like to borrow one of these? It would not be fair to you, sir, Heinrich answered carefully. Bare hands, if you please. Suit yourself, though I might fool you. Königsberg, eh? Rules?
How can there be rules, sir, with three?
An interesting point. Well, let's agree that if eyes are gouged out, they must be handed back when it's over. And tell your corpse brooder that I'm ready now. Corpse brooder, sorry. Pretty sure they still, yeah. Start when you like. Zim tossed his baton away. Someone caught it.
You joke, sir. We will not gouge eyes.
No eye gouging. Agreed. Fire when ready, Gridley.
Please?
Come on and fight, or get back into ranks.
Now, I am not sure that I saw it happen this way. I may have learned part of it later, in training. But here is what I think happened. The two moved out on either side of The two moved out on each side of our company commander until they had him completely flanked, but well out of contact. From this position there is a choice of four basic moves for the man working alone, moves that take advantage of his own mobility and of the superior coordination of one man as compared with two. Sergeant Zim says, correctly, that any group is weaker than a man alone unless they are perfectly trained to work together. For example, Zim could have fainted at one of them, bounced fast to the other with a disabler, such as a broken kneecap, then finished off the first at his leisure. Instead, he let them attack. Meyer came at him fast, intending to body check and knock him to the ground, I think, while Heinrich would follow through from above, maybe with his boots. That's the way it appeared to start. And here's what I think I saw. Meyer never reached him with that body check. Sergeant Zim whirled to face him, while kicking out and getting Heinrich in the belly, and then Meyer was sailing through the air, his lunge helped along by with a hearty assist from Zim. But all I am sure of is that the fight started, and then there were two German boys sleeping peacefully, almost end to end, one face down and one face up, and Zim was standing over them, not even breathing hard. Jones, he said. No, Jones left, didn't he? Mahmoud, let's have the water bucket, then stick them back into their sockets. Who's got my toothpick? A few moments later, the two were conscious, wet, and back in ranks. Zim looked at us and inquired gently, Anybody else? Or shall we get on with the setting up exercises? I didn't expect anybody else, and I doubt if he did. But from down on the left flank, where the shorties hung out, a boy stepped out of ranks, came front and center. Zim looked down at him. Just you, or do you want to pick a partner?
Just myself, sir.
As you say. Name?
Shujumi, sir.
Zim's eyes widened. Any relation to Colonel Shujumi?
I have the honor to be his son, sir.
Ah, so. Well, black belt?
No, sir, not yet. I'm glad you qualified that. Well, Shijumi, are we going to use contest rules, or shall I send for the ambulance?
As you wish, sir, but I think, if I may be permitted an opinion, that contest rules would be more prudent.
I don't know just how you mean that, but I agree.
Zim tossed his badge of authority aside. Then, so help me, they backed off, faced each other, and bowed. After that, they circled around each other in a half crouch, making tentative passes with their hands, and looking like a couple of roosters. Suddenly they touched, and the little chap was down on the ground and Sergeant Zim was flying through the air over his head. But he didn't land with the dull, breath-paralyzing thud that Meyer had. He lit rolling, and was on his feet as fast as Shujumi was and was facing him.
Banzai!
Zim yelled, and grinned. Arigato, Shujumi answered, and grinned back. They touched again, almost without a pause, and I thought the sergeant was going to fly again. He didn't. He slithered straight in. There was a confusion of arms and legs, and when the motion slowed down, you could see that Zim was tucking Shijumi's left foot in his right ear, a poor fit. Shujumi slapped the ground with a free hand. Zim let him up at once. They again bowed to each other. Another fall, sir?
Sorry, we've got work to do. Some other time, eh? For fun and honor. Perhaps I should have told you. Your honorable father trained me.
So I had already surmised, sir. Another time it is.
Zim slapped him hard on the shoulder. Back in ranks, soldier. Company! Then, for 20 minutes, we went through calisthenics that left me dripping hot as I had been shivering cold. Zim led it himself, doing it all with us and shouting the count. He hadn't been mussed that I could see. He wasn't breathing hard as we finished. He never led the exercises after that morning. We never saw him again before breakfast. Rank hath its privileges. But he did that morning, and when it was over and we were all bushed, he led us at a trot to the mess tent, shouting at us the whole way to "Step it up! On the bounce! You're dragging your tails!" We always trotted everywhere at Camp Arthur Curry. I never did find out who Curry was, but he must have been a trackman. Breckenridge was already in the mess tent, with a cast on his wrist, but thumb and fingers showing. I heard him say, "No, just a green stick fracture. I've played a whole quarter with wuss." "But you wait, I'll fix 'em." So, just as a little aside here, Breckenridge, his language is written phonetically. So that is uh, Naw, N-A-W, just a green stick, fracture, Fractchuh. I've, A-H apostrophe V-E, played a whole quarter, Qwahtuh, with wuss, W-U-S-S. But you wait, I'll fix 'em. So, one of the things I appreciate about Heinlein is that he does write out the phonetics. Uh, so that you don't have to assume how they're talking. You know, you just read it and you're like, yeah, that's you know how he sounds. Uh, but just you wait, I'll fix 'em. I had my doubts. Shijumi, maybe, but not that big ape. He simply didn't know when he was outclassed. I disliked Zim from the first moment I laid eyes on him, but he had style. Breakfast was all right. All the meals were all right. There was none of that nonsense some boarding schools have of making your life miserable at the table. If you wanted to slump down and shovel it in with both hands, nobody bothered you. Which was good, as meals were practically the only time somebody wasn't riding you. The menu for breakfast wasn't anything like what I had been used to at home, and the civilians that waited on us slapped the food around in a fashion that would have made Mother grow pale and leave for her room. But it was hot, and it was plentiful, and the cooking was okay, if plain. I ate about 4 times what I normally do, and washed it down with mug after mug of coffee with cream and lots of sugar. I would have eaten a shark without stopping to skin him. Jenkins showed up with Corporal Bronsky behind him as I was starting on seconds. They stopped for a moment at a table where Zim was eating alone. Then Jenkins slumped onto a vacant stool by mine. He looked mighty seedy, pale, exhausted, and his breath rasping. I said, "Here, let me pour you some coffee." He shook his head. "You better eat," I insisted. "Some scrambled eggs. They'll go down easily." "Can't eat. Oh, that dirty, dirty so-and-so." He began cussing out Zim in a low, almost expressionless monotone. "All I asked him was to let me go lie down and skip breakfast. Bronsky wouldn't let me, said I had to see the company commander. So I did, and I told him I was sick. I told him. He just felt my cheek and counted my pulse and told me sick call was 9 o'clock. Wouldn't let me go back to my tent. Oh, that rat! I'll catch him on a dark night, I will." I spooned out some eggs for him anyway, and poured coffee. Presently he began to eat. Sergeant Zim got up to leave while most of us were still eating, and stopped by our table. "Jenkins." Yes, sir?" "At 0900, muster for sick call and see the doctor." Jenkins' jaw muscles twitched. He answered slowly. "I don't need any pills, sir. I'll get by." 0900. That's an order." He left. Jenkins started his monotonous chant again. Finally he slowed down, took a bite of eggs, and said somewhat more loudly, "I can't help wondering what kind of a mother produced that. I'd just like to have a look at her, that's all. Did he ever have a mother?" It was a rhetorical question, but it got answered. At the head of our table, several stools away, was one of the instructor corporals. He had finished eating and was smoking and picking his teeth simultaneously. He had evidently been listening. "Jenkins." Sir?" "Don't you know about sergeants?" "Well, I'm learning." "They don't have mothers. Just ask any trained private." He blew smoke toward us. "They reproduce by fission, like all bacteria."
Oh, hello, Kinetic. Sorry, I didn't see your message. Yes, indeed, it is a book. Not that it would be recognizable, because the movie diverges in virtually every particular um, imaginable, except for the names of certain characters, and that's about it. My biggest gripe with the Verhoeven movie is the complete and total omission of the powered armor. Very much present in this book. We're not going to see that this chapter, or reading chunk, but we will be seeing it later, probably next week. And that's kind of the big deal. Why is this relevant as a book? It's because it codifies, at least to me, it codifies the powered armor as part of the military apparatus concept. Um, on later streams, I'll have pictures from the Japanese animated OVA series. I adore the power armor design there. It's spot on, is what it is. Pretty much exactly as described. The training sequences in that are also pretty good, at least for the training of how to use the powered armor. I'd show it, but you know, I'd get dinged, so I won't. Chapter 4. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people that are with thee are too many. Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there.
So he brought down the people unto the water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, Every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that drank, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 will I save you. Let all the other people go. Judges 7, 2 to 7. Indeed, powered armor like Fallout, only more so.
How many of those have jetpacks?
2 weeks after we got there, they took our cots away from us. They took our cots away from us. That is to say, that we had the dubious pleasure of folding them, carrying them 4 miles, and stowing them in a warehouse. By then it didn't matter. The ground seemed much warmer and quite soft, especially when the alert sounded in the middle of the night and we had to scramble out and play soldier, which it did about 3 times a week. But I could get back to sleep after one of those mock exercises at once. I had learned to sleep any place, any time, sitting up, standing up, even marching in ranks. Why, I could even sleep through evening parade standing at attention, enjoy the music without being waked by it, and wake instantly at the command to pass in review. I made a very important discovery at Camp Curry. Happiness consists in getting enough sleep. Just that, nothing more. All the wealthy, unhappy people you've ever met take sleeping pills. Mobile infantrymen don't need them. Give a cap trooper a bunk and time to sack out in it, and he's as happy as a worm in an apple. Asleep. Theoretically, you were given 8 full hours of sack time every night, and about an hour and a half after evening chow for your own use. But in fact, your night sack time was subject to alerts, to night duty, to field marches, and to acts of God and the whims of those over you, and your evenings, if not ruined by awkward squad or extra duty for minor offenses, were likely to be taken up by shining shoes, doing laundry, swapping haircuts. Some of us got to be pretty fair barbers, but a clean sweep like a billiard ball was acceptable, and anybody can do that. Not to mention 1,000 other chores having to do with equipment, person, and the demands of sergeants. For example, we learned to answer morning roll call with "bathed," meaning you had taken at least 1 bath since last reveille. A man might lie about it, at least one bat. Oh, whoops! I am skipping lines. A man might lie about it and get away with it. I did a couple of times, but at least one in our company who pulled that dodge in the face of convincing evidence that he had not recently bathed got scrubbed with stiff brushes and floor soap by his squad mates, while a corporal instructor chaperoned and made helpful suggestions. But if you didn't have more urgent things to do after supper, you could write a letter, loaf, gossip, discuss the myriad mental and moral shortcomings of sergeants, and, dearest of all, talk about the female of the species. We became convinced that there were no such creatures, just mythology created by inflamed imaginations. One boy in our company claimed to have seen a girl over at regimental headquarters. He was unanimously judged a liar and a braggart. Or you could play cards. I learned, the hard way, not to draw to an inside straight, and I've never done it since. In fact, I haven't played cards since. Or if you actually did have 20 minutes of your very own, you could sleep. This was a choice of this was a choice very highly thought of. We were always several weeks minus on sleep. I may have given the impression that boot camp was made harder than necessary. This is not correct. It was made as hard as possible, and on purpose. It was the firm opinion of every recruit that this was sheer meanness, calculated sadism, fiendish delight of witless morons in making other people suffer. It was not. It was too scheduled, too intellectual, too efficiently and impersonally organized to be cruelty for the sick pleasure of cruelty.
It was planned like surgery for purposes as unimpassioned as those of a surgeon. Oh, I admit that some of the instructors may have enjoyed it, but I don't know that they did. And I do know, now, that the psych officers tried to weed out any bullies in selecting instructors. They looked for skilled and dedicated craftsmen to follow the art of making things as tough as possible for a recruit. A bully is too stupid, himself too emotionally involved, and too likely to grow tired of his fun and slack off, to be efficient. Still, there may have been bullies among them. But I've heard that some surgeons, and not necessarily bad ones, enjoy the cutting and the blood which accompanies the humane art of surgery. That's what it was. Surgery. Its immediate purpose was to get rid of, run right out of the outfit, those recruits who were too soft or too babyish ever to make mobile infantrymen. It accomplished that in droves. They darn near ran me out. Our company shrank to platoon size in the first 6 weeks. Some of them were dropped without prejudice, and allowed, if they wished, to sweat out their terms in the non-combatant services. Others got bad conduct discharges, or unsatisfactory performance discharges, or medical discharges. Usually you didn't know why a man left unless you saw him leave and he volunteered the information. But some of them got fed up, said so loudly, and resigned, forfeiting forever their chances of franchise. Some, especially the older men, simply couldn't stand the pace physically, no matter how hard they tried. I remember one, a nice old geezer named Carruthers, must have been 35. They carried him away in a stretcher while he was still shouting feebly that it wasn't fair, and that he would be back. It was sort of sad, because we liked Carruthers, and he did try. So we looked the other way and figured we would never see him again, that he was a cinch for a medical discharge in civilian clothes. Only I did see him again long after. He had refused discharge, you don't have to accept a medical, and wound up as third cook in a troop transport. He remembered me and wanted to talk old times, as proud of being an alumnus of Camp Curry as father is of his Harvard accent. He felt that he was a little bit better than the ordinary Navy man. Well, maybe he was. But much more important than the purpose of carving away the fat quickly and saving the government the training costs of those who had never cut it, was the prime purpose of making as sure as was humanly possible that no Cap trooper ever climbed into a capsule for a combat drop unless he was prepared for it. Fit, resolute, disciplined, and skilled. If he is not, it's not fair to the Federation. It's certainly not fair to his teammates, and worst of all, it's not fair to him. But this was boot camp. But was boot camp more cruelly hard than was necessary? All I can say to that is this. The next time I have to make a combat drop, I want the men on my flanks to be graduates of Camp Curry or its Siberian equivalent. Otherwise, I'll refuse to enter the capsule. But I certainly thought it was a bunch of crummy, vicious nonsense at the time. Little things. When we were there a week, we were issued undress maroons for parade to supplement the fatigues we'd been wearing. Dress and full dress uniforms came much later. I took my tunic back to the issue shed and complained to the supply sergeant. Since he was only a supply sergeant and rather fatherly in manner, I thought of him as a semi-civilian. I didn't know how, as of then, to read the ribbons on his chest, or I wouldn't have dared speak to him. "Sergeant, this tunic is too large. My company commander says it fits like a tent." He looked at the garment, didn't touch it. "Really?" "Yeah, I want one that fits." He didn't stir. He still didn't stir.
Let me wise you up, sonny boy. There are just two sizes in this army, too large and too small.
"But my company commander—"
No doubt.
"But what am I going to do?"
Oh, it's advice you want. Well, I've got that in stock. New issue, just today. Tell you what I'll do. Here's a needle, and I'll even give you a spool of thread. You won't need a pair of scissors. A razor blade is better. Now, you tight 'em plenty across the hips, but leave cloth to loose 'em again across the shoulders. You'll need it later." Sergeant Zim's only comment on my tailoring was, "You can do better than that. 2 hours extra duty." So I did better than that by next parade. Those first 6 weeks were all hardening up and hazing, with lots of parade drills and lots of route march. Eventually, files dropped out? Sure. Eventually, as files dropped out and went home or elsewhere, we reached the point where we could do 50 miles in 10 hours on the level, which is good mileage for a good horse in case you never used your legs. We rested, not by stopping, but by changing pace. Slow march, quick march, and trot. Sometimes we went out the full distance, bivouacked and ate field rations, slept in sleeping bags, and marched back the next day. One day we started out on an ordinary day's march, no bed bags on our shoulders, no rations. When we didn't stop for lunch, I wasn't surprised, as I had already learned to sneak sugar and hard bread and such out of the mess tent and conceal it about my person. But when we kept on marching away from camp in the afternoon, I began to wonder. But I had learned not to ask silly questions. We halted shortly before dark, 3 companies, now somewhat abbreviated. We formed a battalion parade and marched through it, without music, guards were mounted, and we were dismissed. I immediately looked up Corporal Instructor Bronsky, because he was a little easier to deal with than the others, and because I felt a certain amount of responsibility. I happened to be, at the time, a recruit corporal myself. These boot chevrons didn't mean much, mostly the privilege of being chewed out for whatever your squad did as well as for what you did yourself, and they could vanish as quickly as they appeared. Zim had tried out all of the older men as temporary non-coms first, and I had inherited a brassard with chevrons on it a couple of days before, when our squad leader had folded up and gone to hospital. I said, "Corporal Bronsky, what's the straight word? When is chow call?" He grinned at me. "I've got a couple of crackers on me. Want me to split 'em with you?" "Huh? Oh, no, sir. Thank you." I had considerably more than a couple of crackers. I was learning. "No chow call?" "They didn't tell me either, sonny. But I don't see any copters approaching. Now, if I was you, I'd round up my squad and figure things out. Maybe one of you can hit a jackrabbit with a rock." "Yes, sir. But, well, are we staying here all night? We don't have our bedrolls." His eyebrows shot up. "No bedrolls? Well, I do declare!" He seemed to think it over. Ever see sheep huddled together in a snowstorm?" No, sir." "Try it. They don't freeze. Maybe you won't. Or, if you don't care for company, you might walk around all night. Nobody'll bother you as long as you stay inside the posted guards. You won't freeze if you keep moving. Of course, you may be real tired tomorrow. You may be a little tired tomorrow, sorry." He grinned again. I saluted and went back to my squad. We divvied up, share and share alike, and I came out with less food than I had started. Some of those idiots either hadn't sneaked out anything to eat or had eaten all they had while we marched. But a few crackers and a couple of prunes will do a lot to quiet your stomach's sounding alert. The sheep trick works too. Our whole section, 3 squads, did it together. I don't recommend it as a way to sleep. You are either in the outer layer, frozen on one side and trying to worm your way inside, or you are inside, fairly warm but with everybody else trying to shove his elbows, feet, and halitosis on you. You migrate from one condition to the other all night long in a sort of Brownian movement, never quite waking up and never really sound asleep. All this makes a night about 100 years long. We turned out at dawn to the familiar shout of "Up you come! On the bounce!" encouraged by instructors' batons applied smartly on fundaments sticking out of the piles. And then we did setting up exercises. I felt like a corpse and didn't see how I could touch my toes. But I did, though it hurt, and 20 minutes later, when we hit the trail, I merely felt elderly. Sergeant Zim wasn't even mussed, and somehow the scoundrel had managed to shave.
The sun warmed our backs as we marched, and Zim started us singing, oldies at first, like Le Régiment de Sambre et Meuse, and Casson, and Halls of Montezuma, and then our own Cap Trooper's Polka, which moves you into quick-step and pulls you on into a trot. Sergeant Zim couldn't carry a tune in a sack. All he had was a loud voice. But Breckenridge had a sure, strong lead and could hold the rest of us in the teeth of Zim's terrible false notes. We all felt cocky and covered with spines. But we didn't feel cocky 50 miles later. That's 50, not 15. 50 miles later. It had been a long night. It was an endless day, and Zim chewed us out for the way we looked on parade, and several boots got gigged for failing to shave in the 9 whole minutes between the time we fell out after the march and fell back in again for parade. Several recruits resigned that evening, and I thought about it but didn't because I had those silly boot chevrons and hadn't been busted yet. That night there was a 2-hour alert. But eventually I learned to appreciate the homey luxury of 2 or 3 dozen warm bodies to snuggle up to, because 12 weeks later they dumped me down raw naked in a primitive area of the Canadian Rockies, and I had to make my way 40 miles through mountains. I made it, and hated the Army every inch of the way. I wasn't in too bad shape when I checked in, though. A couple of rabbits had failed to stay as alert as I was, so I didn't go entirely hungry. Nor entirely naked. I had a nice warm thick coat of rabbit fat and dirt on my body, and moccasins on my feet, the rabbits having no further use for their skins. It's amazing what you can do with a flake of rock if you have to. I guess our caveman ancestors weren't such dummies as we usually think. The others made it too, those that were still around to try and didn't resign rather than take the test, all except 2 boys who died trying. Then we all went back into the mountains and spent 13 days finding them, working with copters overhead to direct us and all the best communication gear to help us and our instructors in powered command suits to supervise and to check rumors. Because the mobile infantry doesn't abandon its own while there is any thin shred of hope. Then we buried them with full honors to the strains of This Land is Ours, and with the posthumous rank of PFC, the first of our boot regiment to go that high, because a cap trooper isn't necessarily expected to stay alive. Dying is part of his trade. But they care a lot about how you die. It has to be heads up, on the bounce, and still trying. Breckenridge was one of them. The other was an Aussie boy I didn't know. They weren't the first to die in training. They weren't the last. Chapter 5. He's bound to be guilty or he wouldn't be here. Starboard gun, fire! Shooting's too good for him. Kick the louse out. Port gun, fire! Ancient shanty, used to time saluting guns. But that was after we had left Camp Curry, and a lot had happened in between. Combat training, mostly. Combat drill and combat exercises and combat maneuvers using everything from bare hands to simulated nuclear weapons. I hadn't known there were so many different ways to fight. Hands and feet to start with, and if you think those aren't weapons, you haven't seen Sergeant Zim and Captain Frankel, our battalion commander, demonstrate la savate, or had little Shujumi work you over with just his hands and a toothy grin. Zim made Shujumi an instructor for that purpose at once, and required us to take his orders, although we didn't have to salute him and say sir. As our ranks thinned down, Zim quit bothering with formations himself, except parade, and spent more and more time in personal instruction, supplementing the corporal instructors. He was sudden death with anything, but he loved knives, and made and balanced his own, instead of using the perfectly good general issue ones. He mellowed quite a bit as a personal teacher, too, becoming merely unbearable instead of downright disgusting. He could be quite patient with silly questions. Once, during one of the 2-minute rest periods that were scattered sparsely through each day's work, one of the boys, a kid named Ted Hendrick, asked, "Sergeant, I guess this knife throwing is fun, but why do we have to learn it? What possible use is it?"
Well, answered Zim, suppose all you have is a knife, or maybe not even a knife. What do? Just say your prayers and die, or wade in and make him buy it anyhow? Son, this is real. It's not a checker game you can concede if you find yourself too far behind.
But that's just what I mean, sir. Suppose you aren't armed at all. You're just one of those toad stickers, say. And the man you're up against has all sorts of dangerous weapons. There's nothing you can do about it. He's got you licked on showdown.
Zim said almost gently, "You've got it all wrong, son. There's no such thing as a dangerous weapon."
Huh? Sir?
There are no dangerous weapons. There are only dangerous men. We're trying to teach you to be dangerous. To the enemy. Dangerous even without a knife. Deadly as long as you still have one hand or one foot and are still alive. If you don't know what I mean, go read Horatius at the Bridge or The Death of the Bonhomme Richard. They're both in the camp library. But take the case you first mentioned. I'm you, and all you have is a knife. That target behind me, the one you've been missing, number 3, is a sentry, armed with everything but an H-bomb. You've got to get him, quietly, at once, and without letting him call for help."
Zim turned slightly. Thunk! A knife he hadn't even had in his hand was quivering in the center of target number 3.
"You see? Best to carry 2 knives, but get him you must, even barehanded."
Uh,
Something still troubling you? Speak up. That's what I'm here for, to answer your questions.
yes, sir. You said the sentry didn't have any H-bomb, but he does have an H-bomb. That's just the point. Well, at least we have, if we're the sentry, and any sentry we're up against is likely to have them too. I don't mean the sentry, I mean the side he's on.
I understand you.
Well, you see, sir, if we can use an H-bomb, and as you said, it's no checker game, it's real, it's war, and nobody's fooling around, isn't it sort of ridiculous to go crawling around in the weeds, throwing knives, or maybe getting yourself killed, and even losing the war, when you've got a real weapon that you can use to win? What's the point in a whole lot of men risking their lives with obsolete weapons when one professor type can do so much more by just pushing a button?
Zim didn't answer at once, which wasn't like him at all. Then he said softly, "Are you happy in the infantry, Hendrick? You can resign, you know." Hendrick muttered something. Zim said, "Speak up."
I'm not itching to resign, sir. I'm going to sweat out my term.
I see. Well, the question you asked is one that a sergeant isn't really qualified to answer, and one that you shouldn't ask me. You're supposed to know the answer before you join up. Or you should. Did your school have a course in history and moral philosophy?
What? Sure. Yes, sir.
Then you've heard the answer, but I'll give you my own, unofficial views on it. If you wanted to teach a baby a lesson, would you cut its head off?
Why, no, sir.
Of course not. You'd paddle it. There can be circumstances where it's just as foolish to hit an enemy city with an H-bomb as it would be to spank a baby with an axe. War is not violence and killing, pure and simple. War is controlled violence for a purpose. War is not violence and killing, pure and simple. War is controlled violence for a purpose. The purpose of war is to support your government's decisions by force. The purpose is never to kill the enemy just to be killing him, but to make him do what you want him to do. Not killing, but controlled and purposeful violence. But it's not your business or mine to decide the purpose of the control. It's never a soldier's business to decide when or where or how or why he fights. That belongs to the statesmen and the generals. The statesmen decide why and how much. The generals take it from there and tell us where and when and how. We supply the violence. Other people, older and wiser heads, as they say, supply the control, which is as it should be. That's the best answer I can give you. If it doesn't satisfy you, I'll get you a chit to go talk to the regimental commander. If he can't convince you, then go home and be a civilian, because in that case you will certainly never make a soldier.
Zim bounced to his feet. I think you've kept me talking just a gold brick. Up you come, soldiers, on the bounce. Man stations on target. Hendrik, you first. This time I want you to throw that knife south of you. South, get it? Not north. The target is due south of you, and I want that knife to go in a general southerly direction, at least. I know you won't hit the target, but see if you can't scare it a little. Don't slice your ear off. Don't let go of it and cut somebody behind you. Just keep what tiny mind you have fixed on the idea of south. Ready? On target. Let fly.
Hendrik missed it again. We trained with sticks and we trained with wire, lots of nasty things you can improvise with a piece of wire, and we learned what can be done with really modern weapons, and how to do it and how to service and maintain the equipment. Simulated nuclear weapons and infantry rockets and various sorts of gas and poison and incendiary and demolition, as well as other things maybe best not discussed. But we learned a lot of obsolete weapons, too. Bayonets on dummy guns, for example, and guns that weren't dummies, too, but were almost identical with the infantry rifles of the 20th century. It's two Roman numeral X's. So I'm assuming 20th. Or XDX. I don't know. It could be, because they don't give you a firm date on when this is taking place, just the future. It's like the 1940s and 3040. Well, it is, because it was written. Well, actually, it was first published in 59. For some reason, I thought it was earlier than that. Anyway, it is like that. That's part of why it makes it have an enduring appeal, I think, is because it is familiar while also extrapolating. Where are you? Bayonets on dummy guns, for example, and guns that weren't dummies, too, but were almost identical with the infantry rifles of the 20th century, much like the sporting rifles used in hunting game, except that we fired nothing but solid slugs, alloy-jacketed lead bullets, both at targets on measured ranges and at surprise targets on booby-trapped skirmish runs. This was supposed to prepare us to learn to use any armed weapon and to train us to be on the bounce, alert, ready for anything. Well, I suppose it did. I'm pretty sure it did. We used these rifles in field exercises to simulate a lot of deadlier and nastier aimed weapons, too. We used a lot of simulation. We had to. An explosive, bomb or grenade, against materiel or personnel, would explode just enough to put out a lot of black smoke. Another sort gave off a gas that would make you sneeze and weep. That told you that you were dead or paralyzed, and was nasty enough to make you careful about anti-gas precautions, to say nothing of the chewing out you got if you were caught by it. We got still less sleep. More than half the exercises were held at night, with snoopers and radar and audio gear and such. The rifles used to simulate aimed weapons were loaded with blanks, except 1 in 500 rounds at random, which was a real bullet. Dangerous? Yes and no. It's dangerous just to be alive, and a non-explosive bullet probably won't kill you unless it hits you in the head or the heart, and maybe not then. What that 1 in 500 for real did was to give us a deep interest in taking cover, especially as we knew that some of the rifles being fired by instructors
Sorry, especially as we knew that some of the rifles were being fired by instructors who were crack shots and actually trying their best to hit you, if the round happened not to be a blank. If the round happened not to be a blank. They assured us that they would not intentionally shoot a man in the head, but accidents do happen. This friendly assurance wasn't very reassuring. That 500th bullet turned tedious exercise into large-scale Russian roulette. You stopped being bored the very first time you hear a slug go wheet past your ear before you hear the crack of the rifle. But we did slack down anyhow, and word came down from the top that if we didn't get on the bounce, the incidence of real ones would be changed to 1 in 100, and if that didn't work, to 1 in 50. I don't know whether a change was made or not, no way to tell, but I do know we tightened up again, because a boy in the next company got creased across his buttocks with a live one, producing an amazing scar and a lot of half-witty comments, and a renewed interest by all hands in taking cover. We laughed at this kid for getting shot where he did, but we all knew it could have been his head, or our own heads. The instructors who were not firing rifles did not take cover. They put on white shirts and walked around upright with their silly canes, apparently calmly certain that even a recruit would not intentionally shoot an instructor, which may have been overconfidence on the part of some of them. Still, the chances were 500 to 1 that even a shot aimed with murderous intent would not be live, and the safety factor increased still higher because the recruit probably couldn't shoot that well anyhow. A rifle is not an easy weapon. It's got no target-seeking qualities at all. I understand that. I understand that even back in the days when wars were fought and decided with just such rifles, it used to take several thousand fired shots to average killing one man. This seems impossible, but the military histories agree that it is true. Apparently, most shots weren't really aimed, but simply acted to force the enemy to keep his head down and interfere with his shooting. In any case, we had no instructors wounded or killed by rifle fire. No trainees were killed either by rifle bullets. The deaths were all from other weapons or things, some of which could turn around and bite you if you didn't do things by the book. Well, one boy did manage to break his neck taking cover too enthusiastically when they first started shooting at him, but no bullet touched him. However, by a chain reaction, this matter of rifle bullets and taking cover brought me to my lowest ebb at Camp Curry. In the first place, I had been busted out of my boot chevrons, not over what I did, but over something one of my squad did when I wasn't even around, which I pointed out. Bronsky told me to button my lip. So I went to see Zim about it. He told me coldly that I was responsible for what my men did regardless, and tacked on 6 hours of extra duty besides busting me for having spoken to him about it without Bronsky's permission. Then I got a letter that upset me a lot. My mother finally wrote to me. Then I sprained a shoulder in my first drill with powered armor. They've got those practice suits rigged so that the instructor can cause casualties in the suit at will, by radio control. I got dumped and hurt my shoulder. And this put me on light duty with too much time to think at a time when I had many reasons, it seemed to me, to feel sorry for myself. Because of light duty, I was orderly that day in the battalion commander's office. I was eager at first, for I had never been there before, and wanted to make a good impression. I discovered that Captain Frankel didn't want zeal. He wanted me to sit still, say nothing, and not bother him. This left me with time to sympathize with myself, for I didn't dare go to sleep. Then, suddenly, shortly after lunch, I wasn't a bit sleepy. Sergeant Zim came in, followed by 3 men. Zim was smart and neat as usual, but the expression on his face made him look like death on a pale horse, and he had a mark on his right eye which looked as if it might be shaping up into a shiner, which was impossible, of course. Of the other 3, the one in the middle was Ted Hendrick. He was dirty. Well, the company had been on a field exercise. They don't scrub those prairies, and you spend a lot of your time snuggling up to the dirt. But his lip was split, and there was blood on his chin and on his shirt, and his cap was missing. He looked wild-eyed.
The men on each side of him were boots. They each had rifles. Hendrik did not. One of them was from my squad, a kid named Levy. He seemed excited and pleased, and slipped me a wink when nobody was looking. Captain Frankel looked surprised.
What is this, Sergeant?
Zim stood frozen straight and spoke as if he were reciting something by rote.
Sir, H Company Commander reports to the Battalion Commander. Discipline. Article 9107. Disregard of tactical command and doctrine, the team being in simulated combat. Article 9120. Disobedience of orders, same conditions.
Captain Frankel looked puzzled.
You are bringing this to me, Sergeant? Officially?
I don't see how a man can manage to look as embarrassed as Zim looked and still have no expression of any sort in his face or voice.
Sir, if the captain pleases. The man refused administrative discipline. He insisted on seeing the battalion commander.
I see. A bedroll lawyer. Well, I still don't understand it, Sergeant, but technically that's his privilege. What was the tactical command and doctrine?
A freeze, sir.
I glanced at Hendrik, thinking, uh-oh, he's going to catch it. In a freeze, you hit dirt, taking any cover you can, fast, and then freeze. Don't move at all, not even twitch an eyebrow, until released. Or you can freeze when you're already in cover. They tell stories about men who had been hit while in freeze, and had died slowly, but without ever making a sound or a move. Frankel's brows shot up.
Second part? Same thing, sir. After breaking freeze, failing to return to it on being so ordered.
Captain Frankel looked grim.
Name?
Zim answered.
Hendrik, T.C., sir. Recruit Private R.P. 7960924. Very well. Hendrik, you are deprived of all privileges for 30 days and restricted to your tent when not on duty or at meals, subject only to sanitary necessities. You will serve 3 hours extra duty each day under the corporal or the guard, 1 hour to be served just before taps, 1 hour just before reveille, 1 hour at the time of the noonday meal and in place of it. Your evening meal will be bread and water, as much bread as you can eat. You will serve 10 hours extra duty each Sunday, the time to be adjusted to permit you to attend divine services if you so elect.
I thought, oh my, he threw the book. Captain Frankel went on.
Hendrik, the only reason you are getting off so lightly is that I am not permitted to give you any more than that without convening a court-martial, and I don't want to spoil your company's record. Dismissed.
He dropped his eyes back to the papers on his desk, the incident already forgotten. And Hendrik yelled,
You didn't hear my side of it.
The captain looked up.
Oh, sorry. You have a side?
You darn right I do. Sergeant Zim's got it in for me. He's been riding me all day long from the time I got here.
That's his job, the captain said coldly. Do you deny the 2 charges against you?
No, but he didn't tell you I was lying on an anthill.
Frankel looked disgusted.
Oh, so you would get yourself killed and perhaps your teammates as well because of a few little ants?
Not just a few. There were hundreds of them. Stingers.
So, young man, let me put you straight. Had it been a nest of rattlesnakes, you would have still been expected and required to freeze.
Frankel paused.
Have you anything at all to say in your own defense?
Hendrik's mouth was open.
I certainly do. He hit me. He laid hands on me. The whole bunch of 'em are always strutting around with those silly batons, whacking you across the fanny, punching you between the shoulders and telling you to brace up, and I put up with it. But he hit me with his hands. He knocked me down to the ground and yelled, Freeze, you stupid jackass! How about that?
Captain Frankel looked down at his hands.
looked up again at Hendrik. Young man, you are under a misapprehension very common among civilians. You think that your superior officers are not permitted to lay hands on you, as you put it. Under purely social conditions, that is true. Say, if we happened to run across each other in a theater or a shop, I would have no more right, as long as you treated me with the respect due my rank, to slap your face than you have to slap mine. But in line of duty the rule is entirely different. The captain swung around in his chair and pointed at some loose-leaf books. There are the laws under which you live. There are the laws under which you live. You can search every article in those books, every court-martial case which has arisen under them, and you will not find one word which says or implies that your superior officer may not lay hands on you or strike you in any other manner in line of duty. Hendrik, I could break your jaw, and I simply would be responsible to my own superior officers as to the appropriate necessity of the act. But I would not be responsible to you. I could do more than that. There are circumstances under which a superior officer, commissioned or not, is not only permitted but required to kill an officer or a man under him without delay and perhaps without warning, and, far from being punished, he be commended. To put a stop to pusillanimous conduct in the face of the enemy, for example. Don't get to say the word pusillanimous all that often. The captain tapped on his desk. Now, about those batons. They have two uses. First, they mark the man in authority. Second, we expect them to be used on you, to touch you up and keep you on the bounce. You can't possibly be hurt with one, not the way they are used. At most, they sting a little, but they save thousands of words. Say you don't turn out on the bounce at reveille. No doubt the duty corporal could wheedle you, say, "Pretty please, with sugar on it. Inquire if you'd like breakfast in bed this morning. If we could spare one career corporal just to nurse Major. We can't, so he gives your bedroll a whack and trots on down the line, applying the spur where needed. Of course, he could simply kick you, which would be just as legal and nearly as effective. But the general in charge of training and discipline thinks that it is more dignified, both for the duty corporal and for you, to snap a late sleeper out of his fog with the impersonal rod of authority. And so do I. Not that it matters what you think or I think about it. This is the way we do it." Captain Frankel sighed. "Hendrik, I have explained these matters to you because it is useless to punish a man unless he knows why he is being punished. You've been a bad boy. I say boy because you quite evidently aren't a man yet, although we'll keep trying. A surprisingly bad boy in view of the stage of your training. Nothing you have said is of any defense, nor even any mitigation. You don't seem to know the score, nor have any idea of your duty as a soldier. So tell me in your own words why you feel mistreated. I want to get you straightened out. There might even be something in your favor, though I confess I cannot imagine what it could be." I had sneaked a look or two at Hendrik's face while the captain was chewing him out. Somehow his quiet, mild words were a worse chewing out than any Zim had ever given us. Hendrik's expression had gone from indignation to blank astonishment to sullenness. "Speak up," Frankel added sharply. Well, we were ordered to freeze, and I hit the dirt, and I found I was on this anthill. So I got to my knees to move over a couple of feet, and I was hit from behind and knocked flat, and he yelled at me, and I bounced up and popped him one, and he—" "Stop!" Captain Frankel was out of his chair and standing 10 feet tall, though he's hardly taller than I am. He stared at Hendrik. "You struck your company commander?" "Huh? I said so, but he hit me first, from behind. I didn't even see him. I don't take that off on anybody. I popped him, and then he hit me again, and then—" "Silence!" Hendrik stopped. Then he added, "I just want out of this lousy outfit." "I think we can accommodate you," Frankel said icily, "and quickly, too." Just give me a piece of paper. I'm resigning. One moment. Sergeant Zim. Yes, sir. Zim hadn't said a word for a long time. He just stood, eyes front and rigid as a statue, nothing moving but his twitching jaw muscles. I looked at him now and saw that it certainly was a shiner, a beaut. Hendrik must have caught him just right. But he hadn't said anything about it, and Captain Frankel hadn't asked. Maybe he had just assumed Zim had run into a door and would explain it if he felt like it, later. Have the pertinent articles been published to your company as required? Yes, sir. Published and logged every Sunday morning. I know they have. I will ask simply for the record. Just before church call every Sunday, they lined us up and read aloud the disciplinary articles out of the laws and regulations of the military forces. They were posted on the bulletin board, too, outside the orderly tent. Nobody paid them much mind. It was just another drill. You could stand still and sleep through it. About the only thing we noticed, if we noticed anything, was what we called the 31 ways to crash land. After all, the instructors see to it that you soak up all the regulations you need to know, through your skin. The crash landings were a worn-out joke, like Reveille oil and tent jacks. They were the 31 capital offenses. Now and then somebody boasted, or accused somebody else, of having found a 32nd way, always something preposterous and usually obscene. Striking a superior officer. It suddenly wasn't amusing any longer. Popping Zim? Hang a man for that? Why, almost everybody in the company had taken a swing at Sergeant Zim, and some of us had even landed, when he was instructing us in hand-to-hand combat. He would take us on after the other instructors and worked us over, and we were beginning to feel cocky and pretty good at it. Then he would put the polish on. Why, shucks, I once saw Shujumi knock him unconscious. Bronsky threw water on him, and Zim got up and grinned and shook hands, and threw Shujumi right over the horizon. Captain Frankel looked around, motioned at me. You, flash regimental headquarters. I did it, all thumbs, stepped back when an officer's face came on and let the captain take the call. Adjutant, the face said. Adjutant, the face said. Frankel said crisply, 2nd Battalion Commander's respects to the regimental commander. I request and require an officer to sit as a court. The face said, When do you need him, Ian? As quickly as you can get him here. Right away. I'm pretty sure Jake is in his HQ. Article and name? Captain Frankel identified Hendrik and quoted an article number. The face in the screen whistled and looked grim. On the bounce, Ian. If I can't get Jake, I'll be over myself, just as soon as I tell the old man. Captain Frankel turned to Zim. This escort, are they witnesses? Yes, sir. Did his section leader see it? Zim barely hesitated. I think so, sir. Get him. Anybody out that way in a powered suit? Yes, sir. Zim used the phone while Frankel said to Hendrik, What witnesses do you wish to call in your defense? Huh? I don't need any witnesses. He knows what he did. Just hand me a piece of paper. I'm getting out of here. All in good time. In a very fast time, it seemed to me. Less than 5 minutes later, Corporal Jones came bouncing up in a command suit, carrying Corporal Mahmoud in his arms. He dropped Mahmoud and bounced away just as Lieutenant Speaksma, Spieksma. I don't think I've ever seen that name before reading this. Which is hilarious because I've read the book before, but it's been... Anyway, just as Lieutenant Speaksma came in, he said, Afternoon, Captain. Accused and witnesses here. All set. Take it, Jake. Recorder on? It is now. Very well. Hendrik, step forward. Hendrik did so, looking puzzled and as if his nerve was beginning to crack. Lieutenant Speaksma said briskly, Field Court-Martial convened by order of Major F. X. Malloy, commanding 3rd Training Regiment, Camp Arthur Curry, under General Order No. 4, issued by the Commanding General, Training and Discipline Command, pursuant to the laws and regulations of the military forces, Terran Federation. Remanding Officer, Captain Ian Frankel, M.I., assigned to and commanding 2nd Battalion, 3rd Regiment. The Court, Lieutenant Jacques Speaksma, M.I., assigned to and commanding 1st Battalion, 3rd Regiment. Accused, Hendrik Theodore C., Recruit Private RP 7960924, Article 9080. Charge, striking his superior officer, the Terran Federation then being in a state of emergency. The thing that got me was how fast it went. I found myself suddenly appointed an officer of the court and directed to remove the witnesses and have them ready. I didn't know how I would remove Sergeant Zim if he didn't feel like it, but he gathered Mahmoud and the 2 boots up by eye, and they all went outside, out of earshot. Zim separated himself from the others and simply waited. Mahmoud sat down on the ground and rolled a cigarette, which he had to put out. He was the first one called. In less than 20 minutes, all 3 of them had testified, all telling much the same story Hendrik had. Zim wasn't called at all. Lieutenant Speaksma said to Hendrik, "Do you wish to cross-examine the witnesses? The court will assist you if you so wish." "No." "Stand at attention and say 'sir' when you address the court." "No, sir," he added. "I want a lawyer." The law does not permit counsel in field courts martial. Do you wish to testify in your own defense? You are not required to do so, and, in view of the evidence thus far, the court will take no judicial notice if you choose not to do so. But you are warned that any testimony that you give may be used against you, and that you will be subject to cross-examination. Hendrik shrugged. "I haven't anything to say. What good would it do me?" The court repeats, will you testify in your own defense? No, sir." The court must demand of you one technical question. Was the article under which you are charged published to you before the time of the alleged offense of which you stand accused? You may answer yes or no, or stand mute, but you are responsible for your answer under Article 9167, which relates to perjury. The accused stood mute. Very well, the court will reread the article of the charge aloud to you, and again ask you that question. Article 9080. Any person in the military forces who strikes or assaults, or attempts to strike or assault. Oh, I suppose they did. They read a lot of stuff, every Sunday morning, a whole long list of things you couldn't do. Was or was not that particular article read to you? Yes, sir, it was. Very well. Having declined to testify, do you have any statement to make in mitigation or extenuation? Sir? Do you want to tell the court anything about it? Any circumstance which you think might possibly affect the evidence already given, or anything which might lessen the alleged offense, such as things as being ill or under drugs or medication? You are not under oath at this point. You may say anything at all which you think may help you. What the court is trying to find out is this. Does anything about this matter strike you as being unfair? If so, why? Huh? Of course it is. Everything about it is unfair. He hit me first. You heard him. He hit me first. Anything more? Huh? No, sir. Isn't that enough? The trial is completed. Recruit Private Theodore C. Hendrik, stand forth. Lieutenant Speaksma had been standing at attention the whole time. Now Captain Frankel stood up. The place suddenly felt chilly. Private Hendrik, you are found guilty as charged. My stomach did a flip-flop. They were going to do it to him. They were going to do the Danny Deever to Ted Hendrik. And I had eaten breakfast beside him just this morning. The court sentences you, he went on, while I felt sick, to 10 lashes and bad conduct discharge. Hendrik gulped. I want to resign. The court does not permit you to resign. The court wishes to add that your punishment is light simply because this court possesses no jurisdiction to assign greater punishment. The authority which remanded you The authority which remanded you specified a field court-martial. Why it so chose, this court will not speculate. But had you been remanded for general court-martial, it seems certain that the evidence before this court would have caused a general court to sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. You are very lucky, and the remanding authority has been most merciful. Lieutenant Speaksma paused, then went on. The sentence will be carried out at earliest hour after the convening authority has reviewed and approved the record, if it does so approve. Court is adjourned. Remove and confine him. The last was addressed to me, but I didn't actually have to do anything about it, other than phone the guard tent and then get a receipt for him when they took him away. At afternoon sick call, Captain Frankel took me off orderly and sent me to see the doctor, who sent me back to duty. I got back to my company just in time to dress and fall in for parade, and to get gigged by Zim for spots on uniform. Well, he had a bigger spot over one eye, but I didn't mention it. Somebody had set up a big post in the parade ground just back of where the adjutant stood. When it came time to publish the orders, instead of routine order of the day or other trivia, they published Hendrick's court-martial. Then they marched him out, between two armed guards, with his hands cuffed together in front of him. I had never seen a flogging. Back home, while they do it in public, of course, they do it back of the Federal Building, and Father had given me strict orders to stay away from there. I tried disobeying him once, but it was postponed, and I never tried to see one again. Once is too many. The guards lifted his arms and hooked the manacles over a big hook high up on the post. Then they took his shirt off, and it turned out that it was fixed so that it could come off and he didn't have an undershirt. The adjutant said crisply, "Carry out the sentence of the court." A corporal instructor from some other battalion stepped forward with the whip. The sergeant of the guard made the count. It's a slow count, 5 seconds between each one, and it seems much longer. Ted didn't let out a peep until the third. Then he sobbed. The next thing I knew, I was staring up at Corporal Bronsky. He was slapping me and looking intently at me. He stopped and asked, "Okay now?" "Oh, all right, back in ranks. On the bounce, we're about to pass in review." We did so and marched back to our company areas. I didn't eat much dinner, but neither did a lot of them. Nobody said a word to me about fainting. I found out later that I wasn't the only one. A couple of dozen of us had passed out. And on that exceptionally grim note, we're going to call it for this week. Well, for today. Sorry. I have more streams throughout the week, don't worry. So yeah. Things are pretty grim out there. Pretty unpleasant. You say fun, but it's not as easy as it sounds. Especially when I'm like, wait a minute, who's that? Thank you, though. Hopefully it went smoothly. Yeah, so the book has a bunch of monologues. This is kind of the beginning of where things get a bit divisive. I think most people can generally agree that killing the guy is a tad extreme, and the lashes is kind of crazy. But we are but mere civilians, so we don't understand the glory, I guess, and the honor of being part of the Federation forces or something. Anyway, I think, and maybe Heinlein was like, "This is the way life should be. This is a good thing," but it could also be, "Hey, this is deeply screwed up, and you wouldn't necessarily want this sort of a system in your day-to-day life." Um, so it's hard to get. I try to take it as this is how this society happens to work. Whether that's dystopic to you or not, I think is up to personal judgment at a certain point. I don't think it's cool, but that's me. Um, I am not a military personnel. I'm not ex-military, so I couldn't tell you. I don't have that bent, but it is fascinating to read about. Anyway,
That'll do it for today. Next week, I think we get some. We've had allusions to the powered armor and the training process. I think we get some of that next week. What we definitely get next week is more philosophy of this setting and the civilization these people live in, for better or worse. Also, more on that letter that he received. Um, so lashes I know were traditional for a while. I know hitting a superior officer is deeply frowned upon, deeply frowned upon in general. I assume they do horrible things to you if you do that. I don't know if they beat you or kill you now, but I suppose if you kept doing it, I don't know. Anyway, and pardon my ignorance. Anyway, so this has been Starship Troopers, part the second. There will be more. You'll notice some similarities between this and the movie. There's no powered armor in the movie, sadly. In some of the later films, they have a bit in there, but unfortunately, they are not the centerpiece. Um, the the work that precedes the movie is a Japanese animated OVA series, original video animation adaptation, whatever, um, called Starship Troopers, and that does indeed very much have powered armor in it. That's kind of the centerpiece. Um, it is a good book selection. Thank you. I think it is too. People have asked me to read it already for a while now, and I'm like, fine, I'll get around to it. I've read it on my own ages ago. I haven't done a reread in a hot minute. Um, and it is, I think it's like, people get upset and worked up over it. They're like, oh, it's got such, it's got soapboxing. I'm like, okay, maybe it does. But at least it's an interesting book, right? At least you're like, oh, hey, this was something new and weird and out there. This was an interesting concept. And its depictions of combat are 10 out of 10. Basically, nobody did it better, does it better. It's just absolutely spot on. It's very engaging. Heinlein, when he's on, is on. When he's not on, he's doing stuff that is like, Heinlein, calm down. I'm looking at you, my favorite whipping child. I shall fear no evil, or will fear no evil, whatever. Because, the thing I really want to listen to is some old rich dude who's had his brain transferred into his hot, sexy, sex-crazed secretary, who basically in an internal voice regales him with, oh, literally every person that I look at, I have probably had sexual relations with. And I'm just like, wow, this is getting very tedious very quickly. Can we do something interesting with the setting? And it's like, it gets so close to doing interesting things with the setting. It's like, oh, hey, we live in a world that isn't so hot. Interesting things are happening, but we're not going to tell you about any of them. And I'm like, thanks, Heine. Thanks so much. Oh, I feel like my time's been wasted. At least with Stranger in a Strange Land, I was constantly like, wow, that's weird. Why did you think that was okay to print? Wow, these are some interesting ideas. But hey, grokking is cool. I grok it. Um, anyway, that'll do it for today. Later this week, we've got the final chapter of A Hero Born, Legends of the Condor Heroes Volume 1 by Jin Yong, or Louis Cha, if you prefer. So we've got that coming up. Um, After that, we've got another story from Gregg Egan's short story collection, Instantiation. I don't remember what we've got. Oh, yes. We've got the spooky one, The Nearest, which should make us feel suitably uncomfortable. Heinlein can be trippy, particularly towards the end of his career. He was quite trippy. Um, Earlier on in his career, I feel he's fairly gritty. And if you have to read any Heinlein at all, uh, or want to get a really good taster of Heinlein, I recommend checking out some of his short story collections. they are some of my favorite science fiction works in general. There's some really good ones. Let's see. Where are you? One I always recommend. Where is it? Do I have it buried? I have it buried somewhere. Shoot. Where do I have it buried? I think it's The Unpleasant Profession of Mr. Hogue. There's some really good short stories in that one. I think that's what it's called. Oh, is it here? Or these are my Lensman's volumes. No, that's Manfac. Nope. Nope, it's none of those. I have it buried somewhere. I'm pretty sure it's The Unpleasant Profession. Yeah, here we go. The Unpleasant Profession of Jonathan Hogue. Hoag. Highly recommend that as a short story collection. I'm trying to remember if The Man Who Sold the Moon. Yeah, The Man Who Sold the Moon also has some good ones. Plus, you can listen to the Bowie song. I've never seen this chart. Cool. Anyway, some very good ones. He's got some great short story collections. I kind of recommend Gregg Egan by much the same token. If you want to get into Gregg Egan, try his short story collections. But yeah, he does Heinlein. Heinlein gets really strange later. Like he does The Number of the Beast, Job, A Comedy of Justice, and those are fairly out there. If you like trippy, I tend to probably push you towards Jeff Vandermeer for more modern stuff. For other older material, I would push you very strongly and firmly towards our very good friend, Philip K. Dick. He is a master of making me feel deeply unsettled and confused and bewildered. No one, in my opinion, has ever quite managed to get the sense of pure paranoia in writing that Philip K. Dick did. Um, like Franz Kafka was good. Philip K. Dick ran where Franz Kafka walked, in my opinion. Like reading "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep" is just like Blade Runner's cool and all, and it is cool, it's very cool. But "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," you're just like, wow. it's it's a it's oppressive. It's so well done. Like you feel the smog in the air. You feel how this is an Earth that's basically been abandoned to its own devices, but like civilization just keeps on sputtering. But it's just sputtering and winking out and dying so slowly. All the people there are just it's like the emptiness, the loneliness, the ah. It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. Like reading that the first time after seeing a Blade Runner is like, holy shit, this movie ain't got nothing. you know, it's like, yeah, you've got some of that noir thing going on, but it's like this feels like a populated, vibrant living. It is not in the story. It is not a. It is things are not great. You get some cute, uh, solid references, and I think some of the vibe from Blade Runner 2049, the Villeneuve one, with not Ryan Reynolds, the other one. I'm losing my mind. I can't remember names. Um, that one anyway. The sequel. There's a that one actually gets closer, I feel, in tone to um, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, but then like the ending stuff comes and some of the plot stuff happens, and it's kind of like, wait a minute, nope. Also, A Scanner Darkly. The movie's pretty good. It manages to get you really really solidly confused. Good performances all around. That one's trippy, but the story, the actual book it's based on is even more so. Like take that and double it. Small doses. I do want to get around to reading some Philip K. Dick on stream. I will get around to it. It's strong, very firmly on my list. I've got a solid collection archive of his work. Um, so we'll get around to that. Not of any Philip K. Dick, no, not yet. I might have done a short story by him, but I couldn't tell you which one because it would have been years ago. But it is very firmly, very much on my to-do list. But right now I've kind of backed myself up. But it'll happen. May or may not do Man in the High Castle. I think that one's good. I think it's technically well written, but I'm not. I kind of find it tedious. I don't know. Historical fiction rewrites, like, sort of. I had a phase. I had a phase where I really enjoyed them, like Harry Turtledove and the like. But I've kind of now I'm like, they're right. Like Guns of the South. Guns of the South is fun. If you ever wanted to see an author go well out of his way to be like, oh yeah, Ulysses S. Grant wasn't actually that bad a guy. I'm like, or was it Robert E. Lee? The one from Virginia. Wow, I'm losing my mind. Anyway, yeah, but those apartheid people from the future with their AK-47. Oh, am I spoiling the plot? So yeah, a bunch of apartheid dudes from the future go back in time with AK-47s and supply them to the South. Um, Civil War South in the U.S. And they turn the course of the war. When was that one written? Was that was in the 80s? Was that written? It might have been the 90s. I don't remember. 92. There we go. Yeah. So it's Robert E. Lee, and it's like, how much can Harry Turtledove try and make Robert E. Lee look like a good person who was smart? It's a zany concept. It's pretty fun. It's a fun one. But it's also like you also kind of read it and you're like, you, you sure, Turtledove? Is this the hill you feel like dying on? Because I don't know. He's gone on to do some other interesting ones, like, geez, isn't there one where like Teddy Roosevelt joins up with the Nazis? I can't remember. That one's gone on for a while. And it's kind of like you cock an eyebrow and you're like, wait a minute, what are you doing, bro? I can't remember what that one was called. Anyway, if you want a bunch of alternate history stuff, Harry Turtledove very much has you covered. Um, and of course, I'm getting phone calls. I gotta call it anyway. Have a good one. All right, sorry. Last words. Yeah, I mean, it kind of is pulling stuff out of a hat. So Harry Turtledove is cute if you like alternate history stuff. Um, he quote wrote the book on it unquote more than once. In fact, he's made a career of it. At any rate, I got a scooch. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. If you're listening to this after the fact and you're wondering why these are so rough and I seem to be talking to voices that only I can hear/read, that is because I am. I'm doing these live at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, or UTC -5, um, on every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Um, so you can watch me, listen to me live. or just listen to these after the fact. That's fine too. Anyway, with that, I got to run. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. See you all later.